The billionaire pretended to be drunk, but what his maid did next changed his heart. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The music was still echoing through the marble hall when Alexander Hayes, one of New York's most elusive billionaires, lifted another glass of champagne to his lips. The chandeliers shimmered above him. Laughter rolled through the crowd, and yet all he felt was an aching emptiness. Everyone around him smiled too perfectly, laughed too loudly, especially when they thought he was watching. They weren't here for him. They were here for what he owned. So tonight he decided to find out who would care if all that disappeared. He stumbled slightly near the grand staircase, pretending to be drunk, his tailored suit rumpled just enough to look careless. Conversations paused for a moment, then carried on, as if a man worth billions couldn't possibly fall apart. Only one person moved, a young woman in a modest black uniform, clutching a tray against her chest. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked softly. Her voice cut through the noise like a gentle bell. "You should sit down." Alexander blinked at her, feigning confusion, letting his words slur. "Everyone's having fun, aren't they?" She hesitated, then carefully slid her arm under his to steady him. "Fun's not worth much if you hurt yourself, sir. Let's get you somewhere quiet. No one else came to help." Not one friend, not one business partner, not one of the glamorous guests he'd known for years. Just her, the maid, who probably made in a month what he spent on a single tie. She guided him down the corridor to a private lounge, her steps careful, her grip steady despite his height and weight. The scent of vanilla cleaner clung faintly to her sleeve. "You should drink some water," she murmured, setting a glass on the table. "Do you need me to call your driver?" He looked at her for a long moment, almost forgetting this was supposed to be an act. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Grace," she replied, looking slightly alarmed, as if speaking her own name in front of him was too bold. "You should rest, Mr. Hayes." He smiled faintly. "Grace, that's fitting." She gave a polite nod, turning to leave. But he caught her voice again, soft, almost to herself as she reached for the door. "People think being rich means you don't get tired, but everyone does, sir, even the ones who hide it best." Then she slipped out, leaving him alone with the echo of her words. For the first time in a long time, Alexander didn't feel like the man who owned everything. He felt like someone who'd just been seen. He sat there long after the party had ended, staring at the untouched champagne glass, wondering how a simple maid had managed to show more kindness in 5 minutes than his entire circle had in years. What he didn't know yet, what would change his heart forever, was that this woman's quiet grace was about to teach him the meaning of genuine care. And it all began with that one small act, helping a man everyone else chose to ignore. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of Alexander Hayes's penthouse. The city below was already alive, horns echoing in the distance, but inside the room there was only silence. He sat at the edge of his bed, his hands clasped together, staring at the untouched breakfast laid out by the staff. He should have felt fine. Last night's act was supposed to be a game, a test. But something about the maid Grace kept playing in his mind. The way she looked at him, not as a billionaire, not as a name that filled magazines, but as a person who simply seemed tired. No one had looked at him like that in years. He glanced at his phone. Dozens of unread messages, all from people who wanted something. Investors, socialites, partners, all demanding his attention. Yet the only person he wanted to talk to was the one who never asked for anything at all. Downstairs, Grace was already at work. She moved quietly through the house, polishing the glass table, dusting the piano, folding linens. Her movements were practiced, almost rhythmic. She had been working here for 6 months, long enough to know the routine, but never long enough to stop feeling like an outsider. To her, Mr. Hayes was just a man she cleaned up after a man she had assumed would never even notice her. When the elevator doors opened, she turned quickly, startled to see him standing there. He was not in a suit this time, just a simple gray sweater and dark jeans. His eyes looked softer, almost curious. "Good morning, Grace," he said, his voice calm but warm. She straightened immediately, unsure of what to say. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. I apologize if I disturbed you." "You did not," he said quickly. Actually, I wanted to thank you for last night. Her brow furrowed slightly. Oh, that was nothing, sir. You were not feeling well. It was my duty. Most people at that party saw me stumble and looked the other way, he said, stepping closer. You did not. She smiled faintly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Maybe they thought you wanted to be left alone. Maybe, he replied. But you did not leave me alone. Grace hesitated, unsure how to respond. I guess I would hope someone would do the same for me, she said softly. No one deserves to be left like that. Her words struck him harder than he expected. For a man who had built walls higher than his penthouse view, her simplicity felt disarming. He found himself wanting to prolong the conversation. Do you like working here? He asked. Grace blinked in surprise. No one had ever asked her that. It is a good job, she answered cautiously. It pays the bills. My mother's treatment, my brother's school. I am grateful. Alexander nodded slowly, pretending to straighten his cuff but really buying time to think. And what about you? What do you want? She laughed lightly, a sound that felt rare even to her. Want? I have not thought about that in a while. I suppose peace would be nice. Maybe a small art class. I used to paint before life got busy. He watched her as she spoke, realizing how different she was from anyone he knew. There was no pretense, no agenda, just honesty. You should paint again, he said quietly. The world could use more people who still care about beauty. She gave him a curious look, unsure if he was teasing. Perhaps one day, she said with a polite smile, then excused herself to continue working. Alexander watched her walk away, a strange warmth growing in his chest. That evening, he found himself standing by the same lounge where she had helped him. The empty glass still sat on the table, a reminder of his foolish test. But now, it felt less like a trick and more like a turning point. He realized he wanted to know Grace not as an employee, but as a person, someone whose kindness had pierced through his guarded heart. When his assistant entered to discuss business deals, Alexander waved him off. Cancel tomorrow's meetings, he said. All of them? The assistant asked, confused. Yes, Alexander replied, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow, I am going to learn what real kindness looks like. He did not know what he meant yet, but somehow he knew it began with her. The next day, Alexander Hayes woke earlier than usual. For the first time in months, he skipped his morning meeting, letting the skyline glow untouched outside his office windows. He found himself pacing in the kitchen where the staff usually worked before sunrise. When Grace arrived, she froze at the sight of him standing there, sleeves rolled up, pouring coffee like an ordinary man. Mr. Hayes, she said, startled. You should not be down here. The chef will be here soon. Alexander smiled slightly, offering her a cup. I thought I would make my own today. Would you like one? She hesitated, unsure whether this was a trick. But something about his calm tone made her nod. Thank you, sir. He gestured toward the balcony that overlooked the gardens. Come, sit for a minute. Grace blinked. Sir, I should be starting the rooms. 5 minutes, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Just 5. They stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The sun was just rising over Manhattan, painting the sky in gold. Grace held the warm cup in both hands, unsure what to say. Alexander spoke first. I thought a lot about what you said yesterday, about people not deserving to be left alone. She glanced at him carefully. It was nothing profound, sir. It was, he replied softly. You see, I have been surrounded by people my whole life, yet I have never felt more alone. Grace lowered her gaze, sensing the weight behind his words. You are not alone, Mr. Hayes. You just stopped trusting people. Her words landed like truth he had been avoiding. He gave a small laugh, shaking his head. You are far too wise for a maid, Grace. I just pay attention, she said simply. That is part of my job. Alexander turned to her fully. No, it is not. Most people do their jobs. You notice people. You care. She did not know how to respond. Compliments from men like him usually came with hidden meanings, but this felt different, earnest, quiet. He leaned back against the railing. You mentioned art yesterday. What did you paint? Grace hesitated, then smiled a little. Landscapes mostly, places that felt peaceful. I like painting sunlight. It reminded me that no matter how hard the day was, it always ended with light. That sounds beautiful, he said. Do you still have any of your work? A few sketches, maybe. Nothing worth showing. I would like to see them, he said. She looked startled. Why would you want to see something like that? Because it matters to you, he answered. And maybe it will help me remember what matters to me. There was silence between them. Not awkward, but full of something new: respect, curiosity, maybe even hope. Grace looked away first, setting her cup down. I should really get back to work, Mr. Hayes. Thank you for the coffee. Grace, he said softly, stopping her before she turned. Thank you for not looking away that night. It meant more than you know. She gave a small nod and disappeared through the kitchen doors, her steps light but uncertain. Alexander stayed on the balcony long after she left, the city roaring awake below him. For the first time, he did not feel like the man looking down on the world. He felt like someone trying to rejoin it. Later that afternoon, he walked past the art supply store a few blocks from his office. Through the window, he saw a display of brushes, canvases, and paints. Without thinking, he stepped inside. The cashier recognized him immediately but said nothing, watching as the billionaire carefully chose a small box of oil paints and a set of brushes. That evening, he left them on the Maid station with a handwritten note. For the sunlight you have brought back into this house. A.H. When Grace found it, she stood frozen, the note trembling in her hand. No one had ever given her something so thoughtful without expecting anything in return. For a moment, she smiled to herself, unaware that from the balcony above, Alexander watched quietly, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He did not know where this feeling would lead, but for once, he did not want to control it. He just wanted to see where kindness could take him next. The following week, the mansion felt different. The halls that once echoed with the cold rhythm of luxury now carried something gentler, a kind of warmth that came not from chandeliers or expensive rugs but from quiet gestures. Grace had placed the box of paints carefully on a small table in her tiny staff quarters. Every night after finishing her duties, she would sit by the window and paint a little. The strokes were hesitant at first, then bolder, like she was rediscovering a part of herself she had long buried. Alexander noticed. He would often pass by without making a sound, seeing the faint light from her window flickering in the dark. It made him smile, though he never let her see it. One morning he found her in the garden trimming the roses. The spring air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and new beginnings. You have a good eye, he said, walking up behind her. Grace turned, startled, nearly dropping her shears. Mr. Hayes, you scared me. Apologies, he said with a grin. You seem to have revived this garden. I barely remember it looking this alive. She looked at the rows of blossoms. It is amazing what a little care can do. Flowers just need someone to believe they can bloom again. He paused, his gaze resting on her. People are not so different, are they? Grace met his eyes briefly, then looked away. Maybe, but people are more complicated than flowers. True, he said softly, and some people spend their whole lives pretending they do not need sunlight at all. She smiled faintly at that, not realizing how much he was talking about himself. Later that day, when she went to deliver documents to his office, she found him sitting alone, not in front of his laptop or a stack of contracts, but at a desk with a small canvas in front of him. The sight stopped her. Are you painting? She asked, disbelief in her voice. He looked up, caught but laughed. Trying to. Turns out it is harder than it looks. She stepped closer. May I? He nodded, and she studied the canvas. It was rough, mostly streaks of blue and gray. It is interesting, she said politely, trying not to smile. You can be honest, he said. It is terrible. Grace laughed softly. It just needs a little warmth. She picked up the brush and dipped it in the paint, adding gentle strokes of gold near the edges. There, she said, stepping back. Every storm needs a sunrise. Alexander looked at her, admiration flickering in his eyes. You really believe that, do you? I have to, she said. Otherwise, life feels too heavy. The silence that followed was comfortable, as if the walls that had separated them for months had quietly dissolved. Over the next few days, they began sharing small conversations like this. He would ask her about her favorite colors, her favorite places, her dreams. She learned that despite his wealth, Alexander's life had been full of isolation, parents lost early, relationships built on convenience, trust shattered by betrayal. And he in turn learned that Grace had faced her own hardships but never let them harden her heart. One evening, as rain drummed softly against the glass walls, Alexander came to the lounge holding something behind his back, Grace was cleaning the fireplace, humming softly to herself. "Grace," he said, and she turned, smiling. "Yes, Mr. Hayes." "I thought it was time you had a proper place to paint," he said, revealing a wooden easel and a set of canvases. "Consider it an upgrade from the windowsill." Her eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mr. Hayes, I cannot accept this. It is too much." "It is not," he said firmly. "It is what you deserve." Grace's voice wavered. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Alexander paused, then said quietly, "Because you reminded me what kindness feels like." She looked at him for a long moment, emotion flickering in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "You once said every storm needs a sunrise. I suppose I found mine." Grace smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. And though neither said it aloud, they both felt the same truth bloom quietly between them, something new, fragile, and impossibly real. Days turned into weeks, and the connection between Alexander Hayes and Grace quietly deepened in ways neither of them had planned. The mansion that once echoed with silence now carried the soft sound of laughter, the scratch of brushes on canvas, and the rhythm of two people slowly learning to trust again. Grace painted in the small art corner Alexander had set up for her, while he often sat nearby, reading or pretending to work but really just watching her. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they did not need to. One evening, after dinner, Alexander stood by the window, gazing at the rain streaking down the glass. Grace entered with a tray of tea, setting it carefully on the table. "It is going to pour all night," she said softly. "The city always feels quieter in the rain." "Do you like the quiet?" he asked, turning to her. "Sometimes," she replied. "It makes me think about where I have been and where I am going. It reminds me that peace can exist even in chaos." Alexander smiled faintly. "You always find something beautiful in the simplest things, Grace. I envy that." She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "You could too, Mr. Hayes. You just need to stop chasing noise." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Noise is what built my empire. And silence might be what saves you," she said, her eyes steady on his. The words lingered between them longer than either expected. A knock at the door broke the moment. It was Henry, Alexander's assistant, holding a folder. "Sir, the foundation event is confirmed for next Saturday. The board will be expecting you." Alexander nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. After Henry left, he looked back at Grace. "Would you come to the event?" he asked suddenly. "Me?" She blinked. "Sir, that is not—" "Please," he interrupted gently. "It is not just a charity gala. It is something I want you to see." Grace hesitated, unsure if she belonged in his world, but finally nodded. "If you insist." The following weekend, the gala unfolded in one of the city's grandest hotels. Chandeliers glittered overhead, music swirled, and the city's elite filled the room with practiced smiles. Grace felt small in her simple navy dress, but when Alexander saw her from across the room, he forgot the crowd entirely. "You look—" He paused as he reached her, his voice softer than the music. "Like you belong here." She smiled nervously. "I am not sure about that, sir." "You will," he said. "Just be yourself." As the evening went on, speeches were given and glasses raised, but Alexander's attention never strayed far from Grace. During the presentation, Henry took the stage to announce a new initiative, the Hayes Foundation's Art for Hope program, dedicated to funding community art projects for underprivileged youth. The crowd applauded politely, but Grace froze as her name appeared on the screen. Asterisk, inspired by the kindness of Miss Grace Miller. Asterisk. She turned to Alexander, her eyes wide. "What is this?" she whispered. He smiled gently. "You once said everyone deserves a sunrise. I thought maybe you could help others find theirs." Emotion welled in her throat. "Mr. Hayes, I do not know what to say." "Say yes," he said softly. "Help me run it. It will be yours as much as mine." Tears glimmered in her eyes, but before she could answer, a voice from behind interrupted. "Alexander Hayes," said a sharply dressed woman with a smug smile, "I did not think you would bring your help to a gala." The comment sliced through the air. Grace stiffened, lowering her gaze. Alexander's expression darkened. "This help, as you call her," he said, his voice firm, "is the reason this entire program exists." The woman's smirk faltered, and the nearby guests fell silent. Grace's cheeks flushed, both embarrassed and moved. Alexander turned to her, his tone softening. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Grace. You are the most genuine person in this room. She could barely breathe. The man who once hid behind walls of pride was now standing before the world, defending her without hesitation. In that moment, Grace realized the change in him was real. And for Alexander, surrounded by applause that no longer mattered, he knew he had finally found something worth more than all the wealth in his name. The night of the gala ended with a whirlwind of emotions. The applause faded, the guests drifted away, but the echo of Alexander Hayes's words still lingered in Grace's heart. In the car ride back to the mansion, neither of them spoke at first. The city lights flashed across their faces, reflecting in the quiet between them. Grace finally broke the silence. "You did not have to defend me like that," she said softly. "I am used to people talking." Alexander turned to her, his expression calm but resolute. "You should not have to be. People like that live in cages made of arrogance. You are free, Grace. You do not need their approval." She looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. "It was still unexpected," she murmured. "No one has ever stood up for me before." Alexander's voice lowered. "Then it is about time someone did." The rest of the ride passed in silence, but the air between them was no longer heavy. It was charged with something deeper, something unspoken. When they arrived at the mansion, Grace stepped out first. She turned to thank him, but before she could speak, Alexander said, "Grace, would you stay for a few minutes? There is something I need to tell you." She hesitated but nodded. Inside, the house was quiet except for the soft hum of rain against the windows. Alexander led her to the lounge where their story had, in a way, begun. He stood by the fireplace, the flames flickering across his face. "Do you remember the first night we met?" he asked. Grace smiled faintly. "When you pretended to be drunk? I thought you had too much to drink." "I was not drunk," he admitted, his tone tinged with regret. "I was pretending. I wanted to see who around me cared for more than just my money. And you were the only one who did." Grace's eyes widened. "You mean all of that was an act?" "Yes," he said quietly, "and I am sorry. It was childish, maybe even cruel. I have spent so long surrounded by people who use me that I forgot how to trust. But that night, when you helped me without hesitation, something changed." Grace took a step back, torn between shock and understanding. "So, you were testing me?" "At first," he said, "but then I realized I was not testing you. I was discovering you, the real you, and in the process, I discovered myself." Her heart pounded in her chest. "I do not know what to say, Mr. Hayes." "Say my name," he said softly. "Alexander." Grace hesitated, then whispered, "Alexander." He smiled, a mix of sadness and relief. "That is the first time you have said it. Feels like I have waited forever to hear it." She looked at him, eyes shimmering with emotion. "You did not have to pretend to be broken to find kindness, Alexander. You just had to be honest." He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "You are right. But honesty is hard for men who have lived behind glass walls." She crossed her arms gently. "You broke those walls yourself. You just did not realize it." For a long moment, neither moved. The fire crackled softly, and in its glow, they saw each other differently, not as Billionaire and Maid, but as two people stripped of pretense. "Grace," he said finally, "I know I cannot undo the deception, but I want you to know that everything after that night has been real. Every word, every moment." She breathed deeply, still processing the truth. "It hurt to know you tested me, but I believe you. I have seen your heart since then. It is not about what you did. It is about who you became." Alexander stepped closer, his voice unsteady. "And what if who I became is someone who cannot imagine his life without you?" Grace's eyes met his, filled with both fear and tenderness. "Then you would have to prove that to me," she whispered. He nodded slowly, a promise taking shape in his gaze. "I will." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, but inside the mansion it felt like the storm had passed. For the first time, Alexander did not feel like the man who had everything. He felt like the man who finally had something worth losing. In the days that followed, something subtle but powerful changed between Alexander Hayes and Grace. Their conversations grew longer, their silences more comfortable, and their eyes met with a warmth that neither could hide anymore. But not everyone in Alexander's world approved of the change. Whispers began to spread among the staff and the corporate board members, questioning the billionaire's judgment. One morning, Alexander entered his office to find Henry waiting, looking uneasy. "Sir," Henry began carefully, "there have been discussions. The board is concerned about your involvement with a household employee." Alexander's expression hardened. "My personal life is not their business." "I understand, sir, but they see it as a risk. They fear it could damage the company's image." Alexander leaned back in his chair, his voice calm but cold. "Then maybe the company needs to redefine what its image is." Henry hesitated, then added, "There is more. The press has caught wind of your foundation event. Someone leaked that the maid you defended is now living on your estate. They are spinning it into something inappropriate." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Who leaked it?" "We do not know yet," Henry admitted, "but the story is spreading fast." That evening the paparazzi were already gathered outside the mansion gates. Grace saw the flashing cameras from the kitchen window and froze. "Mr. Hayes," she said when he walked in, "they are saying horrible things. That I—" "Stop," he interrupted gently. "You do not need to explain yourself. I know the truth, and that is all that matters." But Grace shook her head, her voice trembling. "You do not understand. People like you can survive rumors. People like me cannot. They will ruin my name." Alexander stepped closer. "Then let them. I will protect you." "That is not the point," she said, tears filling her eyes. "I never wanted this attention. I just wanted to live quietly, to work honestly. Now everything feels poisoned." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Maybe I should leave, Alexander." His chest tightened at the sound of his name on her lips. "No," he said firmly. "Do not let them drive you away." "You are kind," she whispered, "but I cannot be the reason the world turns against you." Before he could stop her, she walked out of the room. The following morning, she was gone. Her small quarters were empty, the paints and canvases neatly stacked on the table, and a single note lay folded beside the easel. Asterisk. "Do not look for me. You gave me back my strength, and for that I am grateful. But now I have to stand on my own again. Grace." Asterisk. Alexander read the words over and over, each one cutting deeper than the last. For the next few days, he threw himself into work, attending meetings, approving projects, pretending everything was fine. But at night, the silence returned, the same cold silence he once thought he preferred. The mansion felt empty again, the laughter gone, the air heavy with regret. Henry found him one evening staring at the half-finished painting Grace had left behind, a storm breaking into light. "You miss her," Henry said quietly. "More than I thought possible," Alexander admitted. "Then find her," Henry urged. "If she brought you back to life, do not let pride take that away." But Alexander shook his head slowly. "She deserves peace, not another man trying to control her story." Yet deep down, he knew peace was not what either of them truly wanted. The next morning, a news article caught his eye, an interview with a new community art teacher in a small neighborhood school funded by the Hayes Foundation. The photo showed Grace, smiling, her hands covered in paint. Alexander's heart stopped for a moment, then began to race. She had not disappeared. She had simply chosen her own light. He closed the newspaper slowly, a quiet determination settling in his chest. For the first time, he knew exactly what he needed to do, not as a billionaire, but as a man who finally understood what love really meant. 2 weeks later, the world had moved on, but Alexander Hayes had not. His board had forgotten the scandal, the press had found new headlines, and the mansion had returned to its polished emptiness. Yet every night, Alexander found himself staring at the last painting Grace left behind, the storm dissolving into sunlight. One evening, as the city lights shimmered below his balcony, he made a decision. He picked up his coat, grabbed his car keys, and drove out of the city without calling anyone. The next morning, he stood in front of a modest brick building with a fading sign that read, "Riverdale Community Art Center." Through the glass windows, he saw Grace surrounded by children, their hands messy with color, their laughter echoing across the room. She looked happy radiantly, quietly happy. For a long moment, he simply watched, afraid that if he entered, he might disturb the fragile peace she had built. But when one of the children spotted him and pointed, Grace turned. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to still. She froze for a second, surprise flashing across her face, then carefully handed her brush to a student before stepping outside. The spring air smelled of paint and new beginnings. "Alexander?" she said softly, her voice unsure. "What are you doing here?" He smiled faintly. I was afraid you would not want to see me. I was afraid you would forget me, she replied honestly. He shook his head. I could never. For a moment neither spoke. The street hummed quietly around them, the sunlight catching in her hair. You look different, he said finally. Happier. Grace smiled gently. I am. These children remind me why I loved art in the first place. They do not care about money or names. They just want to create. I came to tell you something, he said, his tone earnest. You were right about everything. I built a world on walls, and you tore them down without even trying. I thought I needed to be powerful to be respected. But the truth is, I just needed to be real. She studied him carefully, searching his eyes for the man she once knew. Why are you telling me this now? Because I do not want to live another day pretending, he said quietly. I do not want to hide behind glass. I want to live where there is color and light and you. Grace's breath caught. Alexander. He took a step closer. I know I hurt you, and I do not deserve another chance, but I am asking anyway. Not as a billionaire, not as your employer, but as a man who finally understands what it means to love someone for the right reasons. She looked down, tears glinting in her lashes. You do not have to prove anything, Alexander. You already did by coming here. He smiled, relief flooding his chest. Then let me help you with this, he said, gesturing to the children inside. Let me fund the center properly. No contracts, no publicity, no headlines. Just paint, brushes, and hope. Grace's eyes softened. You really have changed. You changed me, he said, and I am not going back. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached for his hand. All right, she whispered, but on one condition. Anything. You help clean the paint after class, she said with a small smile. He laughed quietly, a sound full of warmth. Deal. Together they walked back inside. The children cheered when they saw Alexander carrying a box of supplies. One little girl tugged at his sleeve and said, Are you Miss Grace's friend? Alexander looked at Grace, his heart light for the first time in years. Yes, he said smiling. Her very good friend. Grace laughed, shaking her head as the class burst into noise again. And as he rolled up his sleeves and picked up a paintbrush, Alexander realized this was what happiness looked like: messy, simple, honest, and real. The man who once pretended to be drunk to test kindness was now learning how to give it back, one color at a time. A year later, the Riverdale Community Arts Center had become something extraordinary. The once small building was now filled with color, laughter, and life. Paintings by children covered every wall, and every Saturday, new faces arrived carrying brushes and dreams. At the heart of it all stood Grace, her eyes glowing with the quiet pride of someone who had turned pain into purpose. Beside her, Alexander Hayes no longer looked like the billionaire the world once gossiped about. He wore simple clothes, sleeves rolled up, a streak of blue paint across his cheek, and a peace in his smile that money could never buy. The two of them had built more than an art center, they had built a second chance. One afternoon, after class ended and the sun poured through the tall windows, Alexander handed Grace a small box tied with a ribbon. What is this? She asked, laughing softly. Open it, he said. Inside was a delicate gold pendant, shaped like a sunrise. Every storm needs its light, he whispered. You were mine. Tears shimmered in Grace's eyes as he gently took her hand. Grace Miller, he said, his voice trembling with sincerity. Will you marry me? She covered her mouth, overwhelmed, then nodded through her tears. Yes, she said, 1,000 times yes. Outside, the children who had been peeking through the door erupted in cheers. Months later, their wedding was small and simple, held right there in the art center, surrounded by the people whose lives they had touched. There were no cameras, no luxury cars, no diamonds, just love, laughter, and light. And as they stood beneath a canvas painted by their students, Alexander whispered, I once pretended to be drunk to test kindness, but it turns out kindness was what sobered me to life. Grace smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. In that moment, they both knew they had finally found what wealth could never buy, love that was real and forever.